Americans are truly in trouble.
Can quickly become one of the least affordable cities in America.
The fentanyl-laced pills were found in 57 packages.
Behind inflation's highest increase in 4 decades.
There's been a record increase in the unhoused population this year.
Americans want solutions. They want common sense. And it all starts with the facts.
The Wall Street Journal, and they cite the Common Sense Institute.
According to the research group Common Sense Institute Arizona.
A new report from the Arizona chapter of the Common Sense Institute.
We've reversed those pre-pandemic fortunes and trends, and now it's growing faster than the economy as a whole.
Women account for over 55% of the jobs lost.
High school graduation is about the best thing you can do to improve your community.
According to Common Sense Institute, here you go, the total cost of crime in our state just last year, $31 billion.
Sadly, this number keeps going up.
The Common Sense Institute estimates Swifties will spend $200 million over those 2 days.
No spin, no partisanship, just the facts. That's the Common Sense Institute, where we are shaping the debate. With expert analysis by the country's leading team of economists and bipartisan fellows. Help CSI move the needle on the pressing challenges of our time. Common Sense Institute is shaping the debate and having a real impact. Jobs and the economy. Education. Homelessness. Public safety. The future of our country. Bettering our community and the lives of everyday Americans. Join us. It just makes common sense. The Common Sense Institute.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Jennifer with Colorado Bankers Association. Fraud is top of mind to the banking industry. Not only is it impacting banks as businesses, it's having a drastic impact on our customers. The FBI 2024 crime report showed fraud losses of $16.6 billion. That is reported fraud. That's a national number, not Colorado, thank goodness. But if you add in unreported fraud, that number drastically increases. Oddly enough, the majority of fraud scams are people voluntarily giving their information, meaning the fraudster has used email, phone calls, social media, something to gain the victim's trust, and they willingly hand over their information. Debit card and check fraud are the most common forms of fraud we see. Check fraud increased 10% from 23 to 24. And what I find surprising, because I don't write checks anymore, is check washing is very in vogue right now. It's the number one form of check fraud, where they take a legitimate check, they change the payee, and they add a few zeros to the number, and they get it cashed at various institutions. We are also seeing fraud on social media exploding. Currently, 70% of advertisers on Facebook are deemed fraudulent. When we look at Zelle users, 50% of transactions through Zelle were fraudulent. Now, it's not that Zelle was fraudulent. Individuals are using that as a payment system, and that facilitated fraudulent transactions. Disappointingly, Meta is claiming that they have absolutely no liability to protect consumers from fraud. The industry is doing several things to help prevent fraud. We're pushing for the elimination of paper treasury checks, making those direct deposit only. Trying the creation of a national data set for commercial checks where it'd be easy for banks to verify the payee in the correct amount. A lot of increased financial information sharing between banks and other financial institutions. And probably most importantly is consumer education. While fraud is big money, it's unfortunate we're seeing the scams become more and more sophisticated every year. Fraudsters know it's big money. I'm excited to hear from the experts we have today. Please join me in welcoming Mark McCullen, Vice President of Policy and Research from CSI Oregon. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
So first things first, I want to give a big thank you to Jennifer and the Colorado Bankers Association for sponsoring our event. Their continued support and feedback is of great value to us. So I want to start by acknowledging our research team, because the 4-state report is a pretty heavy lift. So if you'd please stand up so the attendees can identify you and approach you later with any questions you might have. Where's the rest of the, oh, okay, there they are. They're already standing. Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have Ben Murray here today. Had to catch a plane from Iowa, but that's okay. We do have Iowa represented on the panel. So one special shout out to Thomas Young in the gray suit in the back. He really took the helm of this report, and in the short time he's been with CSI has really been invaluable to all of our chapters, and really grateful to have him with us. So our expert panelists are going to dive into the details in terms of trends that we're seeing, policy responses, enforcement, and the like. And I'll just keep my comments at a very high level because, financial fraud is creating this significant and increasing downward pressure on economic output. It's reducing annual GDP growth by at least 0.5% a year. And so this is because, lending, borrowing, and saving are, inseparable, and they represent really the lifeblood of economic activity. And not only are savings and available capital directly reduced by fraud, but they're also reduced by the costs of preventing it and the erosion of trust in the financial system. To the extent that people are stuffing their cash in the proverbial mattress, that's not fueling any economic activity. And so, in addition to the importance for businesses and households, savings create stability and growth at the national level. Countries with high savings rates like China and Germany, consistently outperform other countries in terms of economic growth, largely due to a larger amount of investment, exports, and the like. And as we've seen during the mortgage crisis and the Asian financial crisis before it, countries with high savings rates also are better able to weather economic shocks to the system, just like savings stabilize household budgets. And so there's a clear macroeconomic impact here, as well as, of course, what the victims of the crime are suffering from, or the different frauds. So in addition to these high-level impacts, fraud does damage in a myriad of other ways. So one anecdote for Oregon, where I'm from, is that the growing financial frauds threaten the state budget. And this is largely by feeding through the prison population. So in my previous role as chief economist for the state, my office was responsible for the prison population forecast. Now, my team was comprised of economists and not criminal justice experts, but the responsibility was given to us by the legislature decades ago. At that point in time, the prison population was overestimated pretty drastically. And so this was following some ballot measures that were of the lock 'em up and throw away the key variety. And so at that time, tens of millions of dollars were spent on a brand new prison, which remains unused to this day. And so given that, and given the fact that a larger prison population means a larger budget for the agency, legislators asked for an independent voice to do these prison population forecasts. And so in that work, we learned a little bit about these trends, and in a large part due to financial fraud, the prison facilities for men and women exceeded their capacity a few years ago. And the overpopulation in the women's prison we have, the only one, was particularly extreme. And this was fueled largely by ID theft and other financial fraud. And so since then, we had the pandemic and the shutdowns in the court system during that, as well as the early release of quite a few inmates. Oh, I shouldn't have said inmates. That's you're not supposed to say inmates or prisoners anymore. Usually I talk about the prison population or prison beds. The Department of Corrections has a different term, which is clients. I think that might not be entirely appropriate, but at any rate, I digress. So at any rate, so it took the pressure off for now, but it seems to be a temporary thing. And the sharp increase in fraud over the past few years that you'll hear about from the panel is really fueling growth in prison beds once again. So with that, I'd like to invite our panelists up to the stage, and I will introduce them, and we'll get started grilling them for info. Welcome. So our first panelist to my left here, Adam Gregg, is the president and CEO of the Iowa Bankers Association. Prior to joining the association last year, he served as the lieutenant governor of Iowa. He was also the Republican nominee for Attorney General in 2014. Our second panelist is Traci Dowd. She's the special agent in charge of the economic crimes unit within the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. So she joined law enforcement over 14 years ago, transitioning from a career in the mortgage and real estate industries. Traci specializes in cases involving money laundering, organized crime, embezzlement, and business identity theft. And our final panelist, Zach Milne, is the senior economist and research analyst for the Common Sense Institute of Arizona. Zachary has also worked in the Arizona governor's office, where he served as an economist. In this capacity, he developed the state's revenue forecasts and advised a team of budget analysts on the caseload forecasts for K-12 education and Medicaid. Zachary also served over 8 years in the United States Air Force and currently serves in the Arizona National Guard. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's start with Zach. So could you describe some of the key findings in the newly released CSI fraud reports?
Yeah, sure. And before I start, I wanted to give another big shout out to Thomas for doing a lot of the heavy lifting on the report. And we really couldn't have done this without him. But yeah, we covered or looked at a bunch of different types of financial fraud, everything from grandparent scams, ATM fraud, identity theft, and things like that. And really, if I could summarize the report, there's sort of three takeaways that I think are worthwhile out of the report. The first part being financial fraud is on the rise across the U.S. The second point being that the older generation is disproportionately impacted. They disproportionately find themselves victims of financial fraud. And the third point is that the impacts of this, kind of to Mark's comments to lead us off here, are much more widespread than just the victims of the fraud itself. And so I have some stats to kind of contextualize this for you guys. So in Arizona alone, we've seen a 379% increase in financial fraud according to FTC reporting since 2020. So that's a pretty dramatic rise in financial fraud. And the average loss per financial fraud event is about approaching $5,000 in Arizona. Now that's pretty significant. The per capita or average individual income in Arizona is about $50,000. So you're talking about approaching 10% of annual income in fraud losses. So that kind of contextualizes that first point. On the second point about the older generation being more kind of represented among the victims of financial fraud, if you look at the age demographics of financial fraud, which we cover in the paper, 70 to 79-year-old age group is about twice as likely to be a victim of financial fraud compared to the 30 to 39 age group. And that, again, that's a statistic from Arizona, but it's generally, these sorts of things are pretty general across the U.S. and all of the CSI member states. And if you look at total losses, overall losses for the 60 and over age group are about 15 times that of the 30 to 39 age group. So that puts some context into that. And then finally, the fact that financial fraud impacts much more than just the victims of the fraud itself, but we do a lot of economic simulations in the report to try and really get at what is financial fraud pulling out of the local economy. But another thing to add into context with this is if you think about all of the lost spending capacity as a result of losing resources to financial fraud, and you sort of quantify that in terms of state revenues, in Arizona alone, the loss to state revenues could be upwards about $220 million to lost sales tax revenues, which is pretty significant in the environment that a lot of state and local governments find themselves in with budget crunches and the like. And so, again, this has this wide sort of sweeping consequences for the economy and for participants in that economy.
Thanks. So, Adam, I want to thank you as well because your input into the Iowa report was really invaluable. So what are some of the key takeaways for Iowa, and what measures can be taken to educate the public and financial institutions about these threats?
Yeah. Well, a couple thoughts just to start out with. First of all, I just want to, Jen Waller had to leave. She had some personal matters to attend to, but I just want to give her a really, really great shout out. So the Iowa Bankers Association was one of the founding board members of CSI in Iowa. And I'm new to this role. I've been in this role a little less than a year, but my predecessor was in the role for 28 years. And so as I was asking him the background of how did we get involved in the first place, basically he said he heard that Jen Waller and the Colorado Bankers Association was involved, so it must be a good thing. And that was enough for him, and it's enough for me too. So I just want to say thank you to her and acknowledge her. She's very well respected among the state execs of the banking associations across the country. So you've got a great one there. Some key takeaways. Iowa did a study along the same lines, and I always try to find kind of the shocking stat and try to put it in context. So for me, out of the Iowa report, it was the stat that we found that in 2024, just shy of 14,000 Iowans were victims of frauds and scams. We just wrapped up the Iowa State Fair, so I'll use the State Fair as my example. That would almost fill up the entire grandstands of the Iowa State Fair. And in terms of how much money they lost in those frauds and scams, you could buy every single citizen of the state of Iowa a front row ticket to a grandstand concert at the Iowa State Fair. That's over $600 million on the high end estimate of what they lost just in 2024. Let me give you another similar stat from a different study, but kind of approaches it the same way. So this is actually from the Aspen Institute in partnership with the American Bankers Association, which is our national trade association. This is a daily stat. What I gave you for Iowa was our annual impact, but this is a daily stat. So every day in the United States, 57,000 Americans fall victim to scams. So that's enough to fill Coors Field to capacity and beyond standing room only. You'd have 10,000 people on the field with 57,000. And they're robbed of enough money every day to build a new Coors Field. That's $430 million every day from 57,000 Americans a day. So it's a really shocking scope. I previously served as lieutenant governor. We were aware of different frauds, but being in this role, it's really put it front and center. And I didn't realize just the extent of what our banks and their customers are dealing with. Some other key takeaways from the Iowa report. Along the same lines, we have seen a drastic increase in financial fraud in Iowa, an over 200% increase overall since 2020. And when you look at cyber-enabled fraud, that's gone up 240% in Iowa since 2020. So really remarkable increases. And then in terms of quantifying the fiscal impact, an estimated $1.5 billion GDP hit as a result of fraud. And that's cost our state coffers in terms of state tax collections over $40 million. And so this is really significant. To your question of what can we do about it? Well, at the Iowa Bankers Association, we've been engaged in a year-long anti-fraud campaign in 2025. So we've been doing public service announcements. We have a new commercial that comes out every month, and it's packaged in such a way that not only does it air on broadcast television, but we're able to share it on our social media channels. We're able to package it for our banks all across the state to be able to use in their channels, in their communications with their customers. Done a bunch of media appearances, a bunch of speaking engagements with partners like the AARP. Zach shared that stat about how some of our elderly are more likely to fall victim to this fraud, so we decided we will go straight to the group that works and represents them. And so we had a really great presentation with an AARP group. Legislation is always a possibility. And lastly, I would just say our message on all of this is to trust your Iowa banker. They see these types of fact patterns all the time. And so, and we'll dive into that a little bit more, but trust your banker when they raise red flags about a transaction that you're maybe falling for a scam. You ought to listen to them.
Thanks. So, Traci, let's continue with the theme of outreach, a topic that I know you're very passionate about. Could you tell us a little about the Economic Crime Unit at the Bureau, along with the resources and training you provide for victims, businesses, and the citizens of Colorado?
Yeah, absolutely. So our unit at the Economic Crime Unit, we're based out of Denver here at the CBI, and we are set up statutorily to assist state and local law enforcement agencies to supplement their identity theft cases, their financial crime cases. And that's what we do. We work with agencies across the state with whether it be embezzlement cases or ID theft or taking the lead in an investigation. We also provide a lot of tools and resources to combat and investigate these crimes, right? Because there's a lot of data involved, as you would imagine these days. And so in teaching law enforcement about the tools and techniques that we have in our unit, we also do a lot of outreach to public and private sectors on like the real estate community, title companies. I do a lot of classes with the real estate community talking about wire fraud and different scams that are attacking their industry on a yearly basis. And I also talk to organizations, and we do a lot of outreach for internal good old-fashioned embezzlement cases, as well as how to protect themselves against the cyber-enabled crime. I do want to also note, because a lot of people are not aware of this, but in our unit, we actually have victim advocates that work directly with fraud victims of identity theft and financial, like the schemes that we see. And they don't need a case with the CBI, but they work with our victim advocates to talk about the loss, maybe the scam they're going through, and how to work themselves out of this identity theft situation. So just for awareness, we do that type of thing. So, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for your efforts. The state's really lucky to have you.
Thank you.
So let's fire it back to Zach. Are there any differences that stood out in the report that could inform policymakers?
Yeah, the fact that older generations are increasingly or more often represented among the victims of financial fraud, that's across all the states, and the fact that it's been rising since 2020, Adam mentioned that, it's kind of the same thing happening in Iowa that we saw in Arizona, really that's across the country. But interestingly, if you sort of just take some age demographic info on the states, say like median age, and you rank the states in terms of median age, and then you compare it to their ranking in terms of how prevalent financial fraud is in their state, there actually isn't as strong of a correlation as I would have thought. Fortunately, I don't have an answer as to why that is, but it certainly seems like getting to the bottom of that may have some policy implications. I actually was curious, Traci, what you thought about that, because it seems like, if we could get to the bottom of that, like what is actually causing the disparate outcomes in the different states, what that may be a good policy route to take.
I think, and this is kind of our thoughts over time, because we also track this type of reporting, and I really think it's because a lot of this population is not reporting to the FTC or to the FBI like other populations, and we highly report that in our unit, but other states may not be encouraging that as highly, and so they may not know that's a place to report. Also, I want to take note too, and we can talk about this more later, but I'm listening to the stats, and we all, of course, see the rise from 2020 onward and the age disparity on who's reporting. But I also think, in thinking about your question, that the crypto and digital, like the crypto scams that we see, all the investment scams, we can't leave here without a little bit of topic on that. But that age group for the crypto investment scams does hit that 30 to 39 year group. So those guys are reporting at a higher rate than maybe they would have 10 years ago, for example. So just a thought.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So Adam mentioned earlier that, some of what can be done. So let's flesh that out a little bit further. So what would you suggest exactly the policymakers consider when they're thinking about future financial fraud legislation, and what measures can households and businesses take to protect themselves?
Well, I love the fact that Colorado has already taken the step of creating a financial crimes unit or division that's focused on that. We've seen that in other states. In Iowa, our Attorney General's taking the lead on some things. Our Department of Public Safety is taking the lead on some things. I'm not sure they've really created something quite as dedicated to it the way that Colorado has. So I think that's great. I know at the federal level, the American Bankers Association, our national trade association, is advocating for more of a one-stop shop federally. You talk about the concern of reporting data, and some are reporting to some entities but not others, and so it leads to potential gaps in the data. And part of that is just frankly consumer confusion. I mean, one of the hardest questions you could ask me is, what really should you do in the event that you're a victim of a fraud? Who should you tell? Well, there's a lot of folks that you can tell, a lot of agencies that you can tell, but it's actually a more complex question than it seems on its face. And so I think just having some more clarity around that. Again, we've focused on awareness. I think Traci can probably back this up better than anybody in the room, but in many, if not most of these cases, the fraudster's not in the U.S. And that makes it really difficult to hold them accountable. Even if you're able to track down the funds and track down exactly what happened, it may be difficult or impossible to hold them to account for it. So we've been focusing on trying to stop it from happening in the first place by raising consumer awareness about the types of frauds, what fact patterns they present to consumers, and just trying to help Iowans be wise to the ways of the world, if you will, in the way that these scams can present themselves. Because I'm sure every one of you here is thinking, I would never fall for one of these things. How stupid do you have to be? Let me tell you, there are very smart people, sophisticated people, people who have built really high levels of wealth who do fall for these things. And there's real good reasons for that because of the sophistication of the scammers. And so our policy has been, let's raise awareness on the front end so that doesn't happen. Last point I want to make on that, understand, to underscore that point, that people do fall for it. Smart people do fall for it. A lot of these scams are actually transactions that are authorized by the victims. In other words, it's different than somebody stealing your check and changing the payee or whatever. That's been done against your will without your knowledge. In a lot of these scams, somebody has been so snowed over that they absolutely believe that they're in love with this person or their child or grandchild is in some kind of trouble. And they are actually going into the bank and authorizing a transaction, oftentimes over the objections of the banker who says, I know you're getting scammed, I've seen this before. That makes it a really unique challenge, right? It's a little different when the customer is affirmatively authorizing those transactions. So it is a very complex challenge for sure.
Thanks. And so we've heard a couple of shocking statistics now from Jennifer and Zach talking about this big ramp up in the prevalence of fraud in the last few years. So Traci, given your expertise as a fraud examiner, can you explain why it's increased so much?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously technology plays a large role in that. AI, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit, has made it a lot easier. We've automated, and the bad actors can automate all of their processes, for example. So technology is a big part of that. I also think just because these are a couple of things that I see that I think are the most important. Important to note that bad actors are sharing information, right? They're networking with each other, they're selling their information and what they know, and that means the network of folks that are able to do this behavior has grown extensively, especially since COVID and over the last 5 years. And I would say that with that then, the victim pool is limitless, right? So given that, I think in technology, you're gonna see it go up. Of course, I feel like on our side, we saw a huge uptick during COVID, as I'm sure most of you have, given really an attack, I think, on government services and just exploiting the efforts there to provide services to the public during COVID. Unemployment insurance fraud, all these different things, right? So a lot of exploitation on that side, and then they've just sort of grown over time. But I'm gonna say using AI to really speed through some of these scams and make it a lot easier and cheaper for them to exploit.
So that's a great segue into the next question. It's for both of our guests about, are we seeing new forms of fraud emerge, and can you describe some of the threats like AI and crypto from these new technologies? We'll have Traci give some further background, and then Adam has brought a fascinating video to share with us.
Yeah, so in our unit, what we've seen a lot, I've always said everyone always asks me, what are you seeing from AI in law enforcement? What are victims reporting? Right now, and I'd say over the last year, we see a lot of very automated AI spoofed websites. And this may seem minor, but I want you to imagine one of the things that we work on in our unit is business identity theft. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's just as it sounds. Somebody is pretending to be you and operate as your business and collect funds or services on behalf and pretending to be you, right? this affects a lot more people than you would imagine. It's very difficult to kind of, like you mentioned, it's not like we're putting handcuffs on these people, right? So spoofing of websites to mimic legitimate businesses is what we see a huge spike, and they're using AI websites to help drive that. And then we also see we've all heard of business email compromise, right? Clicking on something, they're taking over your email. Well, I've been seeing a lot of businesses use, if they feel like they're in a scenario where they're like, maybe they don't trust the characters that they're talking with to send money or whatnot, they're using video chats and Zoom and Google Meet as almost like another form of authentication. And so they then, hey guys, let's jump on a call. And the bad actors will impersonate everyone on this video call, and it makes that person feel comfortable and to send the money. So I see an uptick in that. That's one of the things I'm trying to push out to businesses to be aware of, that really you can't, that's not necessarily the only tool to use to authenticate suspicious activity in an email or something like that. And then of course we see victims report a lot of the mimicking and the grandparent scams that we see.
That's great. So we'll kick it over to Adam to give us a little background on what he's going to share with us.
Yeah, okay. Well, to kind of demonstrate that point, I wanted to show you just how easy it is to replicate someone's voice using very cheap, simple to use AI tools that are readily available online. So I'm looking in the back. I know we've got to crank up the sound to make this video work. So let me tell you about this video real quick. So just kind of on a whim one morning, this is my daughter and I sitting at the kitchen table eating breakfast. I decided I wanted to record, I decided I was going to do this. I had an upcoming speaking engagement, and I thought it'd be fun to try it. So I just had her record this baseline video. It's less than a minute so that I could capture her voice and her speaking mannerisms. So let's go ahead and play this baseline video.
My name is Adam Gregg, and I'm helping my dad with a presentation. He's gonna use this recording to clone my voice using AI.
Okay, so that gives you a sense. That's my daughter, 12 years old, Lauren. She's a 7th grader, just started 7th grade yesterday. So she's a cutie. She's a big Caitlin Clark fan. She's wearing her Hawkeyes sweatshirt there. And so what I did is I took that video, less than a minute, and plugged it into a very cheap AI program online. And I then typed out some text for that to read back to me in Lauren's voice. So the next audio that you're going to hear is that. We go to the next slide.
Hi, this is Lauren. My dad is Adam Gregg with the Iowa Bankers Association. I'm helping him show you how easy it is to trick you using AI.
So I don't know how else to say it other than that's just like, I would fall for that. That's my daughter's voice. And that's just from having typed those couple sentences. So it was able to mimic some of her speaking tendencies and added voice inflection that was frankly appropriate for what those sentences were. And that took a matter of like minutes and that was mostly just me figuring out how to use the program for the first time. I could do it in seconds now. So the next audio that you're going to hear, it's going to be a little cringy. Okay, so this is me voice acting a dramatic scenario. So you're going to hear my voice. I'm going to plug my ears because I don't want to listen to it. But for demonstration purposes, let's go to the next one.
Dad, there's someone here. They came into the house and told me to call you and said they're going to hurt me unless you pay them a lot of money.
So you can see I'm not going to have any acting jobs coming forward. So the interesting thing about the particular tool that I use is it can take something that I said and then spit it back using my daughter's voice. So the next audio file you're going to hear is that, except it converted it into Lauren's voice. Go ahead.
Dad, there's someone here. They came into the house and told me to call you, and they said they're going to hurt me unless you pay them a lot of money.
So again, this is through a program that costs $11 a month per subscription. I did it basically on a whim with less than a minute worth of baseline clip that was used to capture her speaking mannerisms. Think about, well, me, having been in public life, there's probably hours of video of me speaking out there. If you wanted to compile all that, the AI could get really smart on exactly how I speak. The video that we're going to post of this probably could be used to do exactly that. And this took me, I'm going to say it took me less than an hour, and if I were to do it again, it'd probably take me less than 20 minutes to put something like that together. And it's pretty convincing, especially if it was, say, a call in the middle of the night or something like that. And so you can see how a smart person could be led to believe that this really is their child or their grandchild or whoever who's in some type of distress. Not only that, but the only upside I had to doing this was the persuasion effect of it. I didn't have any money at stake. These scammers have millions of dollars at stake, and they will do a lot more to make that sound realistic. They'll add background noise. They'll make it sound like there's clunking in the background in that scenario. If it's somebody who's trying to replicate your grandchild's voice, they'll make it sound like there's the background of a busy jail at night that's going on, and you hear some clanking and moving around and phones ringing. They can do a lot of things to make it even more convincing.
I would even say change that around and let it be the accounts payable clerk or CEO of a business, right? And that puts it in perspective of how easy that would be as well.
Yep. So I'm not trying to scare the pants off of you.
Yes, we are. We're trying to scare you.
Well, yeah, we are.
Yeah. You succeeded. Thanks for sharing that with us. It's fascinating. So, in addition to these emerging threats that you've given us a lot of good information about, in Oregon, we're hearing a lot about old-fashioned check fraud from banks, and Jennifer seemed to back that up, that the same thing is happening in Colorado, and talked a little bit in detail about this. How would you two explain this trend?
I will say in our unit, I have an agent specifically who is really involved with combating organized crime, like boots on the ground here in Colorado, right? And a big part of that organized crime here is identity theft, and for the purpose of committing check fraud. It is kind of the thing, it's been around, but it has been growing quite significantly. What we see on our side is criminals breaking into mailbox clusters or getting mail in some form or fashion, looking for checks. So they like corporate buildings where you have like cyber criminals. They ease of access. If I can break into one cluster box at an apartment building or a business, I'm going to do that, right? You get a lot of checks with the goal of finding a check that, let's say it's for ABC company, right? And they find a check made payable to ABC. They then come to Colorado Secretary of State, or a lot of times they'll go to another state, and they create a business, an LLC, that mimics the payor on the check, right? The ABC company. They will mimic that company and then go open a business account and deposit the check. And that's what we're seeing quite a bit on our side, and important to know that they are incorporating the use of mules to do this, just random people to go and open these accounts as well. So when we go to investigate, I find that the person that opened the account is completely not associated, right? They're just some random person that got paid, $50 to do this.
Yeah, I can add to that as well. So the American Bankers Association found that even though the use of checks has gone down by 25%, the amount of fraud has doubled since 2021. So that just tells you that this is a trend all across the country. I can also share just some similar anecdotes from Iowa, and this is a personal one. I have a friend, I don't know if it's this way in Colorado or in Arizona, but every small town in Iowa has its festival at some point, right? And this one particular town has a festival where they bring in some country music acts. And so in order to do that, they have to send checks for a deposit to secure that act who's going to come 6 months later. If somebody has figured out, and maybe has even infiltrated the USPS system, that checks that are addressed to a particular management company in Nashville, or letters that are addressed, probably have a pretty big check in it. And so somebody in the Nashville post office actually, somehow that got into the hands of a criminal, and they stole that check, changed the payee, went to somewhere else. Now that story has a happy ending because they were able to catch it, and that person didn't have any liability. He's just a volunteer who tries to put together a fun festival every year. But it gives you an example of how folks are trying to infiltrate the system and to be able to do that. The other thing I think about is Iowa farmers write big checks for stuff. They get big checks and they write big checks for the last load of cattle and for the next load of cattle or whatever the case may be. And then when they put those checks in the mailbox out at their farmstead and raise the flag out there that might as well just say, "Come steal me." And that's what happens, unfortunately, sometimes. And so what can we do about it? Well, there's a fun campaign going on, and I'm going to speak very clearly. I want to make sure you hear me on this. It's called Practice Safe Checks. And you can go to practicesafechecks.com for some tips on how you can protect yourself in these scenarios. So what are some of those tips? Number one, safe checks. Abstinence. Actually, avoid using... Thank you. Avoid using checks if you can. There are other methods of payment which can be cheaper, including using online bill pay options and those types of things. If you have to use a check, try to avoid mailing it. Don't put it in one of those blue boxes. Traci kind of hinted at this, but folks are breaking into those blue boxes. And some idiot a long time ago decided all those blue boxes are going to have one universal key. You can find those for sale online, and criminals will buy them so that they can break in. They'll steal the whole load of mail and go through it all to find which envelopes have checks in them. So try to avoid those if you can. Go into the post office, and hopefully that will help avoid it. Or just deliver your check in person. I tell, my Iowa farmers say, we can't do this really without checks. I say, well, go deliver it to the co-op in person. Go deliver it to the bank in person, whatever the case may be. If you have that informed delivery where you get an image of what to expect in the mail and then check that against what you actually get and make sure that you're not missing anything that you were supposed to get, maybe a card that you didn't know you were going to receive from your aunt or your grandma. Those are all things that you can do. You can use a permanent gel ink pen to write your checks. Harder to wash, maybe even impossible to wash. Your typical just ballpoint ink pen doesn't have any of that type of protection. And lastly, I would say check your checks. Actively monitor your accounts. Make sure that the person that you paid that check to is actually, when you look at that image, the person who was paid with that, and make sure it's the same amount that you had previously authorized. So there are ways to protect yourselves from that type of fraud.
Thanks very much. So this came up early on when Zach was asking how to explain some of the differences across states that we're seeing, and Traci mentioned that there's a widespread concern that many of these financial crimes go unreported in some states, not as much in Colorado due to her efforts, but maybe businesses don't want to advertise or publicize their victimization, or households and businesses don't feel that it would help once the money's already gone. But it certainly sounds like a significant issue. So what can be done to help law enforcement agencies identify this?
Yeah, so I think one thing I'll say, I feel like Colorado, through the Attorney General's office, you can find guidelines on data breaches and what a business incorporates, what your responsibilities are if there's a data breach, right? So I know that businesses will take that into account if there's an email compromise or some sort of data breach. So we do see that reporting. Only time we really see it in law enforcement side is if there's a financial loss, right? So I think, though, that a lot of times it's not reported to us because they don't know that there are actually steps that we can take to help recover money. I think which is something that we do, just so you know, I'll touch on that briefly if I may. One of the things that I try and discuss is we talk about prevention as a way to get, to tackle this fraud issue, but it's also about what can we do with the money on the law enforcement side. And one of the things our unit's been trying to do, along with FBI partners, is recover money. So things like wire fraud. The real estate industry, again, a really big example of how wire fraud is so prevalent. We have amazing partnerships with financial institutions, the fraud departments, and title companies where they reach out to us or the FBI to contact the banks to try and freeze money. And we won't go into that here today, but I can tell you The mechanics of it on the law enforcement side, we are getting faster, we are more responsive. We know, as they mentioned, that these bad actors are not in Colorado for the most part, right? So if we're not going to be able to put handcuffs on anybody, which is very disappointing, by the way, but then what we can do and what we try and do is take a victim-centered approach and collect the money and try and chase down the money. And a very strong effort on our side has been going into refining that process, and then we're teaching local law enforcement on how to recover scam funds. And I feel like that is where over the last 9 years since I've been with the CBI that we've had the biggest impact, you know? And so we really try and focus on that as well, so.
Can I build on that really quick? I just want to say, just generally, one of the things that you continually hear about in today's economy is faster payments and things like stablecoin and cryptocurrency and all these things. And everybody's certainly free to make their decisions about that. But I would say that there is some value and some friction in that process, which will allow Traci and her team to be able to notify the banks and to stop that payment. If that's an instantaneous payment and that's already gone and it's overseas, that gets even more difficult to be able to track it down. And so as you hear some of those policy debates, just keep in mind that there are broader impacts beyond just the hot new cool thing with cryptocurrency or whatever the case may be. And then to your question on why is it underreported, certainly some things and we've kind of talked about it being underreported, but there actually is a solid number on that. FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, estimates that only 14% is reported. So the vast majority is not reported. It's like, why would that be the case? Well, lots of times the victims are really embarrassed or ashamed that they fell for it. They don't want anybody to know about it. They don't want to go to their small town community bank and see somebody that they know and explain how they got duped by this. Or they don't want to tell their family members. It might be an elderly person who wants to maintain their independence, and this might be something that they fell for, and they're afraid that it might be the last straw that causes the kids to take the car keys away or whatever the case may be, right? These are real human dynamics and emotions. And the last one I want to say is one reason why it might not get reported is because the person still has not accepted it as a scam. I mean, I can't tell you how many examples, just anecdotally, I have as I'm visiting Iowa banks where they have examples of somebody who has come in and demanded to withdraw $10,000 or $20,000, and the bankers tell them, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, and they might give up for that day, but then a day or two later they come back in and they demand it. And there's even cases where the bank will say, well, we're not going to do that. If you're going to do that, we're going to close your account, and they'll just take their money and find the way to get it to the scammer.
And we see situations where a teller will say, this is a scam. I've had them say, we're not going to do this for you, right? I actually had them say that. And they get back on the phone with their, the boyfriend they're talking to online or whoever the scammer's purporting to be, and they have them say, tell them what verbiage, coach them what verbiage to say to the teller to make the transaction go through and go across the street to make it happen. So you're 100% correct. Yeah, it is shame. Yeah.
So we have time for one more question from me before I move it on to the audience questions. And so this is for anyone on the panel who has input or something to say. It's the outlook for fraud. So, where is it going in the next 3 to 5 years or so, and what are the largest future risks, and any other takeaways you'd like to give the group?
Is that on me?
It's on
Jeez. Well, what we saw after COVID, we saw a general rise in crime overall after COVID, and financial fraud certainly followed that. We've seen some tapering off, I think, in crime more generally, putting aside some of the concerns about the crime numbers. But initially I would have thought financial fraud would have kind of tapered off as well, maybe after COVID, but it seems like a lot of it is centered around this sort of digitization of the economy, and that's certainly not going away. Cell phones, computers, cryptocurrency, all of that. So you'd think this is going to continue to be a pressing issue. This is going to continue to cost states a lot of money. It's going to continue to be a big issue, particularly for the older generation. So,
I will say also that when we see a lot of things, of course, we see everybody in their worst moment. It's a fire of some kind, right? Maybe there's a wire fraud or some sort of compromise to someone's email. And I just want to say this, that what I noticed the most is that in that moment, people that are infected, and it could be businesses or individuals, right? But businesses, their fraud policies, I notice in the moment, don't really mirror what's happening right now. And what I mean by that is their folks don't know where to go if this happens, who to report to if they find out their email's been compromised. Who do they go to? Who do their accounts payable clerk go to if funds were sent to a bad actor? They don't necessarily have the immediate steps in place for their people to act and act appropriately, because time is so important in this financial situation, right? Time is so important. So I think fraud policies with businesses, in government even for that matter, need to reflect and mirror what we're seeing. And probably 20, 30 years ago, right, we could have policies for fraud or theft that, you know, if an embezzlement happens, we report this to law enforcement and we're going to let them take it over. And as we've mentioned here today, a lot of these bad actors are not here in Colorado, maybe here in the United States, but the majority of them are out of the country. So those policies and having law enforcement take enforcement action, and that's just not where we are right now. We don't have the ability, even at the federal level, to really get a full handle on this. So take a look at fraud policies, you know, and have them adapt to reflect what we're actually seeing today.
A couple things I'd say on that point. You know, we've talked about this report from CSI in Iowa, and you might think, boy, what a horrible thing. Actually, there was some good news in the report. One of those things was that Iowa happens to have the third lowest per capita incidence of fraud. So in a lot of ways, we're actually doing things the right way. And my hope is that our efforts can help bend that curve downward. In terms of looking into the future, we've talked about AI a little bit. I would say that's going to continue on two different fronts. I think you're going to see continued development and sophistication of AI to trick people into authorizing transactions, just like I demonstrated with my daughter's voice. That's going to get more and more sophisticated. The videos you'll be less likely to tell that it's AI generated, and so that will be a dynamic. On the other side of it, I think AI will be used to try to defeat the defenses to take things away from you, not by you authorizing a transaction, but against your will, by being better at guessing passwords, by defeating the more and more sophisticated cybersecurity methods that businesses are able to use. You know, if you're up against, it's one thing if you're up against a hacker sitting in his mom's basement or something like that. It's another thing if you're against an AI supercomputer that can continually attack those things. So I think we'll see continued development of that.
That postie underneath the computer is looking pretty good right now, isn't it? Yes.
Okay, so it's time to kick it out to the audience to take their questions. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll run a microphone over to you. Sorry.
This is a funny-looking microwave.
Yeah.
I'm Brent Nizer, live in Greenwood Village. I just want to mention two little fraud actions that happened to me. One was a property tax check to El Paso County, where I have a business there, and it was $60,000 plus caught by my bank check washing, and I put that in a real mailbox. So I'm going to do something more online. Secondly, I started receiving at my home credit card offers, etc., for an LLC registered for my address, a really weird name. Went to the Secretary of State's office. Colorado said I didn't do this, and they said you got to fill out this form, and they sent it over to the Colorado AG's office. I did that. It took 5 months to get that removed. So it's now, that entity is still listed on the Secretary of State's site, but it's viewed as defaulted. Yeah. It doesn't say fraudulent.
Correct.
And then the individual that registered this seems to be from another country.
So we work, again, we have a very close relationship with the Secretary of State, and we've been tracking businesses like that. We call them fraudulent business filings for a few years now. And you're right, the bad actors that are facilitating this are not here. They are just basically using your home as a registered agent to to establish a business here so they can do any number of, my counterpart used to call it a box of chocolates, but any number of different things, from romance scam, crypto investment scams, counterfeit. And I know the Secretary of State has put the process in place that you referred to. It does take a long time. I encourage people, when you see an address come through or a business come through in mail that's not familiar to you, and sometimes you disregard it and then it comes back, they do have a process for this. I imagine we'll see some updates and changes to that, I hope, in the process in the next few years, but the AG's office is working very hard to get through those. We have thousands of those every year. So thank you for going through that process.
Now, Traci, I actually have something on that.
Yeah.
So is it individuals that may already have a couple LLCs or businesses that are more likely to see this sort of thing, or is it just anyone in general can be?
I have found it to be very random. And then at times, depending on the bad actors, they may find a vacant lot that they like a lot. We had one gentleman who had a few hundred or so at his address. They just, because no one bothered with it and it went okay. But you'll notice, you'll get packages at your house. These are victims. They'll get Amazon returns piled up, right? You've got a couple hundred businesses doing that. That really does take its toll, and we consider them to be victims. So this process, as you mentioned, has been going on for 10, 12 years. They really enjoy doing this with Colorado, I think, because it is so easy. If you guys establish a business here, it's so easy to do this, right, online. And so I think that they are capitalizing and exploiting us in that way. And I know there's a lot of effort behind the scenes to help make that better. So.
Can I build on that really quick? You mentioned the Amazon boxes and things like that.
Yes.
Maybe you've seen this too, but we had this recently, I believe actually with one of our staffers, where they got a package sitting at their door, and inside of it was something they hadn't ordered. And there's a document in there that says, returns or whatever with a QR code. And basically what they're trying to do there is bait you into taking a shot of the QR code and providing information, and that's how they would get access to your phone. And so that's another one that kind of blows my mind. So be very cautious. If you get something that you didn't order, just have in the back of your mind, this may be somebody trying to bait you into interacting with them so that they can steal your information.
So I grew up in China, so do you think like a facial recognition technology can help mitigate this kind of financial fraud risk? Because like I had a recent experience, like my parents, the Chinese government tried to contact them to, kind of establish a program to, for overseas Chinese, who have a green card or whatever. So they used, the application we use that they use the facial, you have to use your face, in order to. So I think this can prevent identity theft quite a bit. I think that's facial recognition probably is very widely used in China right now, but it's not used that widely here. So I don't know whether that's something like people are considering.
You want to speak to that at all? Yeah.
So I know that I can speak to what I see. I will say from a verification standpoint, for example, notaries, for example, are trying to use that type of technology. And there are a lot of vendors out there that I'm sure we've heard of that have this in place. And I feel like that is definitely a step in the right direction. I also think it's very expensive right now. So I think that the folks that can afford this and afford the technology are larger companies, larger corporations, folks that have the infrastructure to put that in place. So I'm hoping maybe that'll be something that gets less expensive over time and more accessible. But yes, I agree. It is definitely a good tool.
I think this is a good opportunity too to just say mitigation efforts generally where you're using multi-factor authentication. Yep. So it might be, how you can use your face to open your phone or your thumbprint or whatever. Everybody's familiar with getting the 6-digit code or whatever when you're trying to sign in. It's a big pain in the butt. You roll your eyes every time, but you really ought to sign up for it because it makes sure that it's you who's signing in, and that is a pretty easy way to defeat a lot of different scams that can happen. The other thing I would say along those lines, if anybody ever calls you asking for the 6-digit number that you just got that you hadn't asked for, don't give it to them. Everybody laughs, but when it's out of the blue, you might think, you might fall for that, and people have fallen for it, and that's how they've gained access to somebody's account in a fraudulent manner.
Thank you. All right in the back.
You had mentioned check fraud and that they're taking the checks and then opening up bank accounts to deposit them. How are they able to open up bank accounts without articles of incorporation or tax ID numbers or legal docs?
Yeah. So they go, so they'll get the check and they'll figure out the company name. They go to the Secretary of State, whichever check they, every other state they want to cash that, and they open up a business with the Secretary of State for that purpose. And it could be, again, like we know, it could be the name of the business and, off by a comma or a letter or an LLC at the end, and the businesses are being opened that way. That's my understanding. These guys might have more insight on what that looks like on the banking side.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think they go through all those steps.
Yeah.
In order to create that so it's as legitimate as possible.
Yeah.
Or it appears that way.
It's important to know the Secretary of State, and other recording entities like that, they're not legislated, like their authority is not to verify who's putting in the information or that the information is correct, right? They're just sort of like a recording mechanism, like a clerk and recorder, for example. So those other states have different processes in place for setting up an account or setting a business up with the Secretary of State. So they typically will go to states that are very easy to do online.
Okay, so we have one here. I saw one over there we can do next.
Phil Doty. The FBI suggests that in connection with that video you had that families have a secret word. Yeah. So if your kid calls, you say, what's the secret word? Yeah. I don't know how effective that is.
It works. But it works. I got one of those, and I love it. I've been using that with my kids for years.
The FBI also says change your passwords as often as you change your underwear, which you can remember.
Yeah.
But my question to you is, when you have fraud, it says credit card. It says report it to the police department or whatever. I can't imagine the police department in Greenwood Village is going to do a lot. Who do you report it to if you have fraud besides your bank?
So I would say, as you mentioned credit card fraud, I'd say when you're reporting it to local law enforcement, and what's the goal? If the goal is to, number one, if it's credit card fraud, you're calling a credit card company, right? And a lot of times you need a case report, whether it be for insurance or credit card companies. So I think that's important. If you report some type of like ACH fraud, wire fraud, what we see is you report it to the local agencies, then it kind of goes in a report, and a couple days later it goes to investigations or their economic crime unit, right? And again, the philosophy behind a lot of this, though it's changing with law enforcement, is to try and find out who did this to you, right? So what we're trying to train a lot of folks to do is recognize we're not going to find out who did that, but can they be made whole in some way? I think there's an efficiency standpoint. If we started investigating all the credit card theft and the skimming behavior that happens, all of these efforts take place, but we also have to think about efficiencies on the law enforcement side. So that's something that we think about. But wire fraud, and I don't know if you guys have heard of IC3.gov for the FBI. I'm going to speak on behalf of the FBI here because over the years, FBI's IC3, which is the Internet Crime Complaint Center, did that right. I did. So IC3.gov, that's where we even send folks, because if you have a wire fraud, for example, or some type of fraud where if it's within 72 hours, with 50 grand or above, in international or domestic, they have a very smooth process in place to help work that for you. They use technology. They have a team that work them. Over the last 5 years, they've done amazing things for I believe, at a national level. And they can use resources for even out of the country. So use that as a resource. It moves very fast. If it's within the state of Colorado and you have a fraud situation where you have a loss over, or maybe it's, we've had things happen for over 3 months. 3 months pass and it's some type of fraud or scheme that they sent out. we contact the financial institutions and their fraud departments, and the reason why we do that, and it's really important for those that may not know, is the banks may have already flagged that on their own without law enforcement reaching out, and so we always follow up with a phone call to the beneficiary side of the bank to see if the money's there, because if it's there, we can use seizure warrants and law enforcement action to pull that money back. And so we always try and follow up, and so the local law enforcement, do they have time to do that all the time? They're on patrol or investigation. So on the financial crime area of law enforcement, I think you're going to see it changing here in the next year. But I feel like you need to report it to your locals. It's important because we track all of this information as well. So.
Yeah, I'd say the intelligence sharing function, if for no other reason, is enough. I'll just use an example from Iowa. One of our larger communities, there was a situation where there were texts going out impersonating one of the major banks in that community, and it went out to a lot of different people. And by reporting it to local law enforcement was able to put examples of the texts that people were getting on their social media chains from that police department saying, hey, if you're getting a text like this, it is not from that bank. And so just even sharing that information hopefully prevented some people from clicking on that link that came and potentially giving up their user information. So totally worth it. Then I also want to credit you. I want to make sure nobody else missed what he said on having a special word for your family if somebody's calling and they're in distress, so that you can know exactly if that's somebody who is. It could be something off the wall, bananas or whatever. But something that only you and your family know, so that you can verify that it's actually them. And that has defeated, I can give you examples in Iowa where that has actually defeated somebody impersonating a grandchild who was supposedly in jail in Mexico or something like that.
I love that.
Great, thank you.
So my question is, internationally, what countries, are there any countries that are dominating this kind of practice, and is it state-sponsored?
I'll speak to the law enforcement side of things. Yes, this is transnational organized crime for sure, right? That is targeting all of this. We talk about the crypto investment scams right now, romance scams, and do you all kind of know what we're referring to when we say that? Like, it's really important to know, like, the bad actors are using online dating victims to move money. Again, 99% of all wire transfers that we have into our unit are to a money mule, someone that's dating somebody online, right? Think about that for a moment. We're laundering money for these folks. So to answer your question, this money takes a few hops right before it goes overseas. We're seeing large amounts of scam centers or scam compounds in Cambodia, for example. And there's a lot of strong efforts to expose these environments this is big business, right? I heard a stat that I have from last year in the crypto investment scams, $9 billion last year in the United States in losses. It's doubled every year since COVID, so can you imagine what next year is going to look like? So those are the folks responsible. Cambodia, and there's other places too, but they're set up like, if you can imagine hotels, just like you see in businesses, just like you do down here in the tech center, they're set up like that all over the world. So yes, that's where they are. Yeah. I'm so sorry, sir. I cannot comment on it.
I remember sitting at a American Bankers Association conference, and their fraud expert was talking about how it's really horrible how all this fraud, so much of this fraud money goes to support horrible things like human trafficking and drug lords. And I thought, yeah, right. That's just what you say to capture attention. And then, probably my most reliable news source is the Wall Street Journal. And like a month later, the Wall Street Journal had an article, and you can look it up. It's on pig butchering scams. Yep. And basically what they mean by that is they fatten up the pig, which is the American citizen who's falling for the scam, and then eventually they butcher it and take all the money. But what that article exposed was, this one happened to be in Singapore, but basically it were people who were being human trafficked, and the only way they got paid or fed that day is by researching online, developing relationships on social media with people, sometimes having read obituaries so that they know somebody who's grieving and is maybe in a vulnerable state, and they'll reach out to them and develop a relationship over the course of months. They do this as essentially their job, even though they're probably forced to do it. And then that a lot of those funds go to support Chinese drug lords. And the Wall Street Journal kind of lays out all of their investigative reporting that, in my mind, totally verified that. And then I started saying that in public speaking engagements, and the Iowa Bankers Association website started getting attacked hundreds of thousands of times a day from China. So that's kind of an interesting fact.
Yeah.
Probably not a coincidence.
So we do have time for one more question.
Yeah, my question is just about reporting. Being a small community bank, we get a lot of fraud, and we feel like we're beating our heads against the wall because we don't know where to go. We try to go to the other financial institution, and we're calling somebody in India for a Texas bank. You know, it's just a pain. But, like, what can we do? Is there a resource besides IC3?
Yeah.
Like how, you know, because we deal with it daily.
So I can say this, and we again, I cannot stress to you how important relationships. I have a spreadsheet, which I love spreadsheets, but it's like a couple hundred banks and credit unions all over the United States where we work and build relationships, where I can email or pick up the phone and call and say, hi, I had this situation. And it becomes really important. So I always say, give us a shot. Give us a shot at your fraud. Like, I'm going to give it my best shot. We actually have banks that will report to us because they are communicating with the beneficiary bank of where the money went and getting no response. But maybe I have a fraud contact and their law enforcement liaison folks, and I can pick up the phone and call them and get some sort of information. I always feel like that's really all anybody wants. Some people have already accepted that maybe the money is gone, but they wanted information. And so we try and provide that on a real-time basis to banks as well as individuals and businesses. So I have my cards with me. So I will give me a shot. And believe it or not, this process of reaching out to banks, it's emails, it's phone calls. It is not very time-consuming. And it really is worth the time to communicate to try and get some answers. And every bank has different fraud policies, right? Some may work with us and some may not, and that's totally understandable, but we always give it a shot. Yeah.
One thing I would say on that too, first of all, I appreciate the nodding heads as we're giving these examples, because I know you guys are absolutely seeing this on the ground, and that's nice verification of it. But I don't know if your bank is a member of the American Bankers Association, but I know they have developed a tool that is designed to identify who basically the fraud department is and how to get in contact with them directly.
Can I have that?
We could probably arrange that. And so I think it's actually open to non-member banks because everybody is dealing with this. So you might do a little bit of research. If your bank is a member, for sure you've got access to that. That's awesome. And it can be a great way to just call it, because some of these larger banks, multinational banks in some cases, how do you get a hold of the fraud department, right? Who do you call? This is the registry of who you call when you're dealing with that particular bank.
I love that. That's great.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate your many insights today. We do have a small gift as appreciation for your efforts. We do not have a bottle of wine for Zach. His gift is getting to work at CSI.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So with that, I'd like to invite Kelly Caulfield, the Executive Director of the CSI Mothership here in Colorado, to the stage to close out the program.
Places you can be. We appreciate it so much. I'm Kelly Caulfield. I'm the Executive Director of CSI Colorado, and I'm just incredibly proud to be a part of this network of 4 states. You all hear us talk about this a lot, and I'm so happy you get to see it for your own eyes here, that we really are just doing great work here in Colorado and nationwide. And I think we're making a huge difference. And the timing is good. Common Sense turns 15 this year. The state of Colorado turns 150 next year. And I know that we are making a difference. We just had a Colorado special session, and we had so much interest in our work, somewhat related to the topics today on AI. No one had studied what the impacts were going to be to the economy of this wide sweeping AI regulation that the legislature passed here last year. And I was incredibly proud. Dr. Young has gotten a lot of kudos, and Dr. McKenney on the Colorado team teamed up to do this amazing study that was important during the legislative session to talk about what were the costs to jobs and to the economy. We also studied what the impact would be when these bills pass that would increase taxes. What is the economic impact of that? The impact to jobs, the impacts to GDP. No one else is doing this work. Before I came to Common Sense, I really valued CSI's data because, again, there's no other think tank in Colorado that is providing objective data that is not also advocating. We don't advocate, we don't lobby, we just produce this data. Our housing fellows are working on research to show the economic benefits of more starter homes. Our crime fellows are doing research showing the economic cost of fentanyl. And we rely on the support of people like you to help us do this work. We are a nonprofit organization, and any support that you all provide would be tax deductible. I'd like to just share a few ways that you all could support Common Sense. It feels kind of funny with the topic today, but we do have an envelope on all the chairs tonight. You can provide it to someone you know. You know me, you know Cinnamon, you know Earl. If you do feel inclined to give and support our work, we are always so grateful for that support so that we can continue to do the good work that these economists do. We're so incredibly proud of them. If you would rather not write a check after today's event, thank you so much. You can feel free to write on these envelopes, electronic transfer appreciated, and we will follow up with you if you just want to slip your business card in there, and we can send you our very secure instructions on how to provide that support to CSI. Two other ways that you can support us. We do a lot of events to get the word out about our work. We're doing 90 reports here in the state of Colorado. So 2 events, please mark your calendars. September 9th, early morning, we'll do our Eggs in the Economy, 7:30 to 9. Same place, different topic. We'll be diving deep on the economics of agriculture. We'll be studying the wolf issue and what the cost has been to the economy of wolf reintroduction in Colorado, as well as talking about a new study on the economics of outdoor recreation and stream access. We know this is a really important issue that will be in front of policymakers over the next year. And then the third way you can support us is really in our Free Enterprise Summit. We love this program. This is our annual marquee event where we celebrate the state of free enterprise this year. It's going to be a new location, so we outgrew our space at Broncos Field and Empower Field. We love being there, but we're too big for the space. So we're going to Glendale this year, December 9th. Hannah Scudera, the CEO of the Daniels Fund, will be our keynote speaker, our first female keynote speaker, I think. Very exciting. And we are looking for sponsorships for that event. I mentioned that Common Sense turns 15 this year. We are looking for an anniversary sponsor, just a shameless plug for someone to be that 15-year anniversary sponsor to support that event at a $15,000 level. Comes with a lot of goodies that I can talk to you about more. And then in the very least, it is so helpful just to support us with a table sponsorship at that summit. So as you're just thinking about ways that you can support your community this fall, please think about us. There are QR codes on these slides where you can learn more, and we'd love to talk to you about it here in this room as well. So please get home safely, take the work that you've learned today to make a difference, and share with policymakers and community members and across your dinner table. Thank you all so much for being here.